Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to our KnowledgeCast webinar featuring EMC. The topic of today's webinar is assuring service performance in your software defined world, and today we're going to take a close look at how communication service providers and others can position themselves to stay ahead of the curve as the next wave of network technology approaches. I'm Jesse Kreiderman, Senior Editor with Pipeline Magazine, and I'll be your moderator today. During today's webinar, we'll hear from Rick Walsworth, EMC's Software Defined Data Center Product Director, and Tom Hayes, Service Assurance Product Director with EMC. There will be 2 live polls today, and following the presentations from Rick and Tom, we'll have a question and answer portion. Now, a couple of housekeeping items before we begin. To change the volume for the webcast, just move the slider within the volume area to the left of the presentation window. We encourage you to submit questions for the speakers, and you can do this at any time during the presentation by typing your questions into the Q&A text area to the left of the presentation window, and then clicking the Submit button. We're going to address as many questions as time permits after our presenters' prepared remarks. You can download a copy of the slides for today's presentation from the resource list, which can be accessed by clicking on the green folder icon at the bottom of your screen. The resource list also contains several white papers and interesting customer stories, and I encourage you to check them out. By clicking on the other icons at the bottom of your screen, you can learn more about today's presenters, gain access to additional resources, or share your participation in today's events within a number of social media outlets such as LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook. Lastly, if you experience any technical problems during the webcast, you can either submit a question or click on the question mark at the bottom of the page below the presentation window, which will take you to the webcast help guide. Now let's get started. Now, as we've been reporting in Pipeline Magazine, service providers, government agencies, and companies of all shapes and sizes are moving to virtual data centers and cloud architectures just to take advantage of the numerous benefits they offer, such as dramatically increased agility, lower costs, lower barrier to entry into new markets, improved efficiencies, and so on. In aggregate, we're calling this next-gen information technology the software-defined data center. And while it indeed offers well-documented benefits, the virtualized environment also ushers in a brave new world of service assurance. Today, Rick and Tom are going to cover 3 capabilities designed to address these new IT environments. 1, how to visualize and understand the dynamic and increasingly complex relationships between compute, network, and storage elements. 2, how you can identify root causes and risk conditions. And 3, how to optimize resource utilization and control costs. Rick Walsworth will be our first speaker today. He's the Director of Product Marketing for EMC's Advanced Storage Division. Rick joined EMC as part of the Kasha acquisition in 2006, where he served as Vice President of Marketing. And prior to that, Rick was Vice President of Marketing at Meraki Networks and Sand Valley Systems. And he's also held Senior Executive Product Management and Technical Sales positions at Com21, First Pacific Networks, and GDE. Following Rick's presentation, we're going to hear from Tom Hayes, Director of Products for EMC's Service Assurance Suite, who is responsible for the development of strategy and go-to-market initiatives worldwide. Tom has over 20 years' experience working at the heart of the IT industry and substantial expertise in IT management technologies and solutions. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first presenter, Rick Walsworth.
Thanks, Jesse. And Tom, good to join you again, and thank you, everybody, for joining our session today.
Rick, nice to be with you, and this should be fun. Looking forward to it.
So as Jesse said in the introduction, what we're going to focus on today is infrastructure management around software-defined data centers, and really to make sure that as you're looking and exploring these new levels of virtualization within your data center, you want to be able to make sure that you are prepared to be able to handle this next wave of innovation because of the fact that the dynamics that are taking place within the software-defined data centers are tremendous. And as Jesse said, you've got a lot of opportunity to take advantage of it, but also create some challenges. We want to make sure you're aware of those challenges and then specifically how to address those. So let's go ahead and get started. So first, if you look at some of the changes that are happening within the data center infrastructure, and then those ecosystems that are being supported by these data center infrastructures, there's a whole new set of applications and technologies that are coming on. There's different consumption models, and expectations of the users are very different, as are their outcomes. Their business outcomes and their expectations are changing. And kind of the key message here, and I think a lot of people are realizing this, is that our world is changing fast, but the data centers of today are falling behind this innovation. And if you couple with that some predictions that the digital universe, which is estimated today anywhere between 10 and 20 zettabytes, is supposed to grow to over 40 zettabytes by 2020. So it's just an amazing amount of growth from all this digital data that are created by these different consumption models, these new applications and technologies, and certainly these expectations for higher levels of business outcomes. And so if you look specifically at some of the challenges that are presented by this, it really does present, I think, a number of challenges that any data center manager has to look at today. First off, this unconstrained data growth. And in a lot of cases, these are created just by the different compute devices that are now being attached into a data center infrastructure, and then the expectations to be able to present and protect those throughout these heavy growth periods. And a lot of times what ends up happening, just because of the siloed nature of data center infrastructure and how it's been built around applications today, you do have stranded investments, because I can't necessarily take compute or storage or network resources from one area of the data center and allocate it elsewhere where I may be underutilized. So I don't get the full capability of the investments that I've made, and I, in many cases, end up driving up my fixed costs. On top of that, just because of the siloed nature of some of these data center infrastructures that have been built around these physical domains, I do have this siloed management where I may have these different tiers of data that are being managed within my physical infrastructure, but then as I start to move some of that to virtual and then others of that to pure cloud, I end up having different management paradigms for these different types of ways to approach how I manage this physical, virtual, and cloud infrastructure. And then on top of that, from the operations team, it just creates a whole new set of challenges because of the fact that the service levels across my physical, virtual, and cloud domains may be very different. And so how do I manage these different service levels? How do I track configuration and fault management where adds, moves, and changes could impact a physical device might be different than how it impacts a virtual or a cloud-based device. So it really does present some challenges around that. And at the end of the day, it not only drives up my fixed cost, the capital cost that the CIO typically looks at when he's planning budgets, but also the operational costs. And these are many times the variable costs when I'm looking at how to be able to address these specific challenges.
It is interesting, Rick, to see all the companies that we speak to in transition, trying to move from a history of, as you say, domain-specific management tools that started out managing physical, gradually started to try to pick up the virtual, and now trying to understand the relationship between the physical and the virtual, bring together the end-to-end view from applications through the network, the storage devices, and understand all of those relationships. Most companies I talk to are in that transition, as you say.
Yeah, exactly. So, as you look at it, cloud computing really has the opportunity to transform IT. And that is the ability to be able to drop operational costs. And you look at how do you take those variable costs that we talked about and the ability to be able to lower those operational costs while increasing productivity, which at the end of the day is going to increase revenue. So when you start talking about cloud computing, a lot of times it's the ability to be able to consolidate physical infrastructure and lower your capital costs, but it also lowers the operational costs. And we're going to look at some tools and some technologies that are available today to help you do that across physical, virtual, and the cloud domains. But when we talk specifically about transforming IT, what do we mean? I mean, what is, to put this into something that's tangible, how do we address the ability to be able to do this? And these are some parameters that are typically talked about when you're talking about transforming your IT infrastructure. First off, if you're looking at provisioning things such as storage or compute within a data center infrastructure, a lot of the companies we talk to and customers we talk to today tell you the problem is it just takes so long. And a lot of it is tied up in just internal processes, but it is a mode where they want to get from it taking days or months to provision, a terabyte of storage to a user or a developer in the environment down to minutes or seconds, and move it away from central IT being the help desk to serve this up to much more of a self-service model. If you look at the compute devices, this is a big area that impacts us all that have changed. Whereas before, I used to have my laptop that I would get from IT, and it always fit within that specific specification. To now, they give you choice. It's BYOD. You can bring your own device, and it may be a tablet, it may be an iPhone or a smartphone. It may be your own laptop computer. And now IT is really faced with having to manage all these different devices and all the data that's created within these devices. So it does create some challenges, but also some opportunities. The other thing that is a lot of discussion when you talk with customers is rather than going from a flat-based charge for my compute or IT services, go into one that's metered so that I essentially pay as I go across there. And what it does is it provides better accountability for the services that are being deployed, but also provides the users the ability to be able to select based on what levels of service they expect. They're going to have to pay based on those metered services. But what it really does is it takes IT out of these silos and brings it into more of a service offering where I now have a catalog of services that my users have the ability to be able to take advantage of. And if you look down at the bottom of this slide, it takes you from being a reactive department, within the IT organization to being more proactive where I have the ability to be able to increase the agility of the IT infrastructure, but then I also have the opportunity now to innovate and leverage that infrastructure as a way to be able to differentiate the business and help drive more revenue to the bottom line.
It is interesting to see, Rick, that when you mention the word cloud, oftentimes people think Amazon, Google, Rackspace, all the public cloud providers. And of course, what we're talking about here is not only the public, but the private cloud, hybrid cloud environments. It is interesting to talk to IT organizations and companies that are feeling that pressure to be able to deliver services, as you say, quickly, with self-service, with the kinds of capabilities, flexibility that the public cloud providers are offering and being able to do that internally with their own organization. So there is some pressure on IT organizations within companies today to transform themselves to compete with, if you will, some of those public cloud providers.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great segue, and I think gives us a good opportunity to be able to poll the users and the audience that are on today. So I'm going to open up this quick poll here, and the question out to the audience is, what percentage of your servers are now virtualized? So I'll give you about 30, 45 seconds to go ahead and submit this. But what this does is, again, gives us some information in terms of where's the audience at in terms of their level of virtualization for their compute infrastructure, which is the first area that people look at when they're virtualizing their infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, we should think about it. We talk about cloud, as people are answering this here. We talk about cloud. There's a lot of components to it that you just highlighted a moment ago, but kind of the foundational piece is the virtualization of the servers. We're going to get into virtualization of storage and networks and software-defined everything as we talk through this, but this is kind of a core metric to understand where people are, and then people, of course, roll into chargeback or self-service portals and catalogs of services and those sorts of things that really flesh out the cloud environment. But this is a good base metric. It'll be interesting to see this, Rick.
Okay, 5 seconds.
All right.
All right, 2, 1. Here we go. Wow. Okay. So very interesting. So everybody, 100% of the respondents essentially said that they're in the 0 to 25%. And that's not really surprising. I mean, we hear a lot of that. There's still a lot of physical infrastructure that's out there that still needs to be virtualized. So what this says is that 25% of my compute, 0 to 25% of my compute infrastructure is being virtualized, which really presents an opportunity, I think, to look at not only the rest of the compute infrastructure, but then also take the as Tom just mentioned, the network and the storage infrastructure and start to virtualize that as well.
We need all the names of all these people for our sister company, VMware.
Right, exactly. Okay, so let's now take a traditional view of the data center itself, and this is how data centers have been built really since, if you even look back as we came away from the mainframes and into client-server architectures, where I had my applications and I built essentially these silos of infrastructure where I had my storage, my compute, my network, my firewall, where I had my security and all my management, and I ended up having to build these silos to ensure that service levels are being delivered. So this is kind of the old way. But what certainly is happening is that now I'm taking that and I'm starting to consolidate and pool these resources and move to everything essentially being software defined. Obviously, software defined compute is very well understood and something that I think we're well on the way to be adopting those models. But the ability to be able to take the network, the storage, the security, and the management aspects of that, to be able to combine that now, abstract it in such a way that I have the ability to essentially, rather than managing a physical device, I now can manage compute resources that are pooled as part of a pool. Now it gives me the ability to automate processes. And I can start to move back to some of those transformational models that I talked about previously around self-service and choice computing and the ability to be able to meter this. Once you've abstracted your resources, you pool it, and now you automate it, it gives you a framework now to be able to build upon that. So what we're going to do is we're going to explore essentially how I do that across the different management domains and what it means to different users in the environment, because to a VMware administrator or a Microsoft Hyper-V administrator, that may be very different than a storage administrator or an operations team. So we're going to look at the different personas and how the impact of this virtualization capability applies to those different users. And it really does change the management itself. So now as I look at taking and abstracting and automating these services, I now look at how do I take these server compute, my storage management, my network management, and security management, how do I bring those into models now where I have the ability to be able to operate these in a cloud environment, taking advantage of these pools of services? Now, one way to do that is to take a look at what are the pain points that keep a CIO awake at night, right? So if I look at it, what are the key issues when I'm trying to manage this data center infrastructure that just drive the CIO crazy? First off, it's meeting SLAs. And how do I understand the relationship between configuration changes and compliance requirements within that infrastructure? And how is that going to impact my ability to be able to meet those SLAs? Secondly, obviously, it's controlling cost, right? And how do I get the best utilization of what I have today, but then also how can I leverage that information and that data, the telemetry that comes from my infrastructure, to be better prepared to plan for the future in terms of what capacity planning I need. And then on top of that, the ability to be able to essentially provide more agility to the business. And this is really where the innovation that I talked about before comes into play, where I now have the ability to be able to quickly deploy new applications and new services out within the environment, and then try to understand the impact analysis of that. Because before, what ended up happening is that you had to build the infrastructure based on what your requirements were for today, but if I double my growth, what's the impact to my infrastructure? Well, today now with some tools, and we're going to walk through some of these tools, we have the ability to better predict what those growth requirements are and then provide an impact analysis in terms of how is that going to impact my infrastructure as I grow this out. So really, if you break this down to some simple terms, we can really kind of look at, the ability to visualize, analyze, and optimize. And when we talk about visualize, we're talking specifically about the ability to understand the requirements between application to the storage environment, or the physical to virtual. Also, as I look at the analysis component of that, I want the ability to be able to have a very good indication of what my configurations are. And then how do I manage capacity and performance? Because a lot of times it ends up being a balance. And I want to be able to make sure I understand where those tipping points are, so that as I make changes to a component within my infrastructure, I want the ability to be able to identify real quickly where those potential challenges might be, isolate, and then act upon them. So it's not just a passive tool. I want the ability to be able to take action based on the information that's being provided. And then once I have that information, I really need to be able to optimize my resource utilization and the ability to be able to accelerate service delivery. And so that, again, as I'm looking at the ability to be able to provide more agility to the business and be much more proactive and innovative in how I'm driving the business, these tools really provide the ability to handle the ability to see it better, to understand what I have and analyze it better, and then optimize that infrastructure. So if you look at this, there's really kind of three primary focus areas in trying to have a dynamic cloud-based infrastructure that I'm trying to manage. And we're going to explore each of these in a fair amount of detail. First off, as I look at the data protection capabilities, right? It's the ability to be able to offer not just real-time replication and disaster recovery, but it's really the ability to build policies around these data protection environments, because of the fact that I may have mission-critical applications that are my revenue stream and my cash register for the business that are absolutely mission-critical, and I may have other services on the other end of the spectrum that are important to the business, but I may not have that mission-critical need to be able to protect that data. So the ability to be able to manage across the life cycle of data and manage copies of data really now falls into much more of a policy-based framework that gives me the ability to manage that in a central component, but offer different levels of service based on the criticality of the data that's being protected. The second focus area is going to be around storage resource management. And this is really the ability to be able to understand fully what my storage resources are within this infrastructure, and to be able to manage service levels across those different storage arrays. And by the way, this isn't, we're not talking just about one type of storage. This is a heterogeneous environment where I may have, VMAX and VNX and other vendor storage in there as well. So it really starts to become a story of being really heterogeneous based on the infrastructure components that I've built out for my storage in the data center today. And then finally, and this is the area that Tom's going to drill down on, is really service assurance and the ability to be able to manage service dependencies and impacts and really ensure that my service levels are being met based on the infrastructure that's being built out. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take each of these components and start to break it down and provide a little more context around what we mean, and then talk specifically around some of the software suites and solutions that are being built around these different areas. So I'll start with the data protection management. And so again, putting it back into those simple terms that I talked about before, visualize, analyze, and optimize. In a data protection environment, you really want to visualize what your recovery objectives are, not only from the standpoint of what application data is being protected, but how important is it to my business to be able to ensure that I have, let's say, a recovery point objective of 30 minutes or 10 minutes for information that's much more critical in that nature. In other words, how much data can I afford to lose? Now, once you visualize those recovery objectives, you want the ability to be able to apply the right types of technologies to it, so that for those applications where I have a very tight recovery objective, I want to make sure that I'm using real-time replication and applying the replication tools that are appropriate for that level of protection versus other applications where I may have a recovery objective of 24 hours, where I can lose a day's worth of data and it's not going to impact my business. So I may be using backup tools to be able to do that. Now, once I've done that, I want to be able to look at the recovery policies to be able to minimize the data loss. So this is the analysis portion of it, where I have the ability to be able to manage service levels to these specific recovery objectives, whether they be recovery point objective, RPO, or recovery time objective, RTO. And that essentially now it starts to dictate my SLAs against the protection capabilities for each of the applications in those environments. Now, once I've done that and I have a very good understanding of what those recovery objectives are, I want to optimize my infrastructure. I want to make sure I'm getting full use of all of my storage, compute, and network resources to be able to ensure that I can deliver this services-based data protection, so that as a user within a multi-tenant environment, I now have the ability to self-select based on a catalog of services which of these levels I want to take advantage of in my environment, and then also the ability to be able to meter and charge back as a service provider based on the service levels that I'm delivering to that user. So again, it's self-service, where I have the ability to select between backup and replication management within that environment, and then get the data back, and then provide that in a self-service model from a user standpoint to the provider, who is now providing the metering and the chargebacks based on the service levels that are being signed up. So now as we look at some specific tools that we have to be able to provide that, in the real-time protection capability, EMC has a software product called AppSync. And essentially what AppSync is a model that provides dynamic protection that's synchronized to your virtual applications. So it's very simple in the fact that you can install it yourself. It does operate in a mode where I can select based on my service level requirements, either between snapshots, replication, or backup, and then have the ability to be able to drive that as a service within a multi-tenant environment. So everything is built on SLA, so I have the ability to define my service level agreements based on the replication or snapshot technology that I'm using. So it could be gold, silver, bronze, or platinum, for example. And then it's a self-service model, so that the administrators for the applications in the environment now have the ability to be able to provide self-service and do these capabilities within a catalog, and then essentially be billed back for the services that are being deployed. So this is very good for real-time replication, real-time snapshot capability. As we move now to backups, there is a tool we have that's called Data Protection Advisor, and it provides a lot of those same capabilities, but now in a backup environment. So what it does is it provides a lot more visibility and insight into my resources that I have within my backup environment, allowing me the ability to be able to reduce cost and lower complexity across a heterogeneous backup environment. So this could be whether you're using EMC backup tools such as Data Domain or Avamar or Networker, or it could be using third-party backup tools as well. So regardless of your backup environment, Data Protection Advisor is a tool that really provides insight, provides the ability to lower those costs, and then also lowers your complexity out across that environment. So now I'm going to take a look at a customer that's actually done this very successfully. Capri Solutions is actually a provider, a solution provider, but they were faced with the challenge that they were not able to meet their SLAs, their service level agreements for their backups, based on their recovery times. The recovery times were essentially just taking them right out of their backup windows. And so what they did is they actually deployed a solution based on EMC backup technology. So they used Data Domain, Avamar, Networker, and Data Protection Advisor, which we just highlighted within their environment. And by essentially re-architecting their backup environment to much more of a backup as a service, where they've transformed that into much more of a self-serve metered type of service, they immediately improved their backup success rate up to 96%. So their backups went up by over 96%. But also in doing that, they were able to reduce their backup windows from 14 hours, which essentially took them well beyond their maintenance window, to under 4 hours. Their image level backups now dropped from 3 hours to 5 minutes, so they were able to do very quickly be able to do image level backups within their environment. Their file restore times went from a full day to now under 2 hours. And so across that now, obviously, you can look at their backup costs and what they were spending just in manpower previously to address these requirements. Now as they move to this backup as a service model, they actually reduce their costs significantly across that environment. Okay, now what we'll do is we're going to switch gears here a little bit and talk specifically around storage resource management and the ability to be able to visualize your application to storage dependencies, analyze the configuration and the capacity growth to be able to provide that in-depth capacity allocation and planning. So this is the future planning that I talked about before. And then the ability to be able to optimize those investments to be able to improve your utilization, but also improve the return on your capital investments for the storage that you're buying today, as well as help you predict in terms of what capacity planning requirements look like as I go into the future. So now when I talk about visualize, I'm really looking at the ability to be able to take not just from the storage environment itself, but get that end-to-end view. So all the way from the application itself, in this example we're using Oracle, down through the server compute infrastructure, and obviously we're assuming that's either going to be physical infrastructure or virtual compute infrastructure, down through the network all the way down to the storage itself. So it really provides that end-to-end view of the relationships of the topologies out there and helps you get a better understanding so that you can perform the analysis required with those SANs views into the performance, availability, and configuration requirements, and then help you in terms of tracking any changes within the environment itself.
And this is just a comment, Rick. This is great information for the storage team here. We're talking about the storage administrators, the storage operations guys, and being able to give them a very complete view of how the application is tied to the storage environment.
Yeah, exactly. Great point. And so the ability to take and understand and analyze your configurations itself now allows you the ability to go in and monitor compliance against any best practices or storage support matrix requirements you have within the environment. So it does this automatically. Without these types of tools, this is a very manual process. These tools really automate a lot of these capabilities. Also identifying proactively any potential configuration issues, and then ensuring that your SAN is configured properly to be able to meet the service levels that you're signing up for. So this is very much a tool that provides that deep analysis, allowing you to be very proactive about potential issues in the environment and addressing those issues before it becomes an issue. And again, to the storage team, this is just invaluable information. Now the optimize side. So the optimize really helps you in terms of getting better utilization of what I have today in terms of the ability to be able to go in and obtain the detailed trending information for the capacity planning, perform the analysis required across my workloads, and ensure that my response time trends are within spec, and then the ability to be able to make sure, am I going to be able to meet my service levels going forward? And then also when you're talking about virtualization within that storage array, they have the ability to deliver virtual provisioning where I may have thin pools, right? Where I may look like I'm presenting a terabyte of storage to a host or to a VM, when in actuality I may only have 100 gig of physical disk allocated. So how do you manage those thin pools of virtually allocated storage? So again, these tools provide you those capabilities to be able to essentially give you that visibility right up front and be very proactive about how I manage that infrastructure. And so what we've done is we've actually taken all these capabilities and integrated them very nicely into the Storage Resource Management Suite. And so what this SRM suite does is it provides essentially within a single package a set of tools that now allows you to be able to manage out across a diverse infrastructure. And so what this does is it now within my storage infrastructure gives me the ability to be able to look at the relationship mapping that I talked about before between application all the way down to the storage device itself, across my configurations, topology, performance, capacity, and any alerting that I have within that, and provide that into a single console. That single console now could be something that I provide directly to the storage team, or that I essentially create dashboards that my CIO might want to look at as part of their service deployment. So again, by packaging these all nicely into a great tool, it gives not only the storage team the visibility that they need to be able to be very proactive about their environment, but also provides to the CIO the right level of information as well. And so now as we take a look at the a customer example here. This is actually the Hospital of St. Raphael. And what this customer did is, as they used their SRM tools, their storage resource management tools, they were really looking to get better visibility of their entire SAN environment to be able to improve their resource monitoring and reliability, but they wanted to essentially defer any unneeded capital expenses, because what was happening before was that the storage team was essentially just kept adding storage into the environment without having that full visualization, full analysis capability. So now what happened is that by putting in this solution we just talked through, they now have this end-to-end storage resource management. And leveraging one of the components of the SRM suite, ProSphere, it now provides them, their administration, the ability to be able to take a look at their entire storage environment and be much more proactive about how they deploy these services. So again, just a simple example here of how some of these customers have taken advantage of these capabilities and passed this on. So again, in summary, what we've looked at is we've looked at the data protection and the storage resource management. Now I'm going to hand it over to Tom and let him talk through the service assurance management within these infrastructures.
Rick, you teed that up very nicely. Thank you. And as Rick said, we're going through the personas here. So the backup and recovery person, great set of tools and information there. We talked about the storage team and being able to provide them with a wealth of information. I'm now moving on to the operations team, the folks that are looking at the big board in the operations center, and you'll notice a consistent theme here: visualize, analyze, and optimize. One thing I should mention is that we just talked about storage resource management. The nice thing about that is that the capabilities and the information that's provided to the storage team is leveraged here as well. So picture an operations team being able to see from the VM and the applications all the way through the infrastructure, which servers, which clusters, which ESX server it's running on, and then into the storage environment, leveraging some of the storage information that Rick was just talking about. So visualize. Understand the fast-changing environment. What do I mean fast-changing? VMware, a good sister company of ours, has terrific virtualization capabilities. Most customers that we talk to today are kind of virtualized their first round of test and dev applications and are starting to look at mission-critical applications. But with VMware, we've turned on DRS, Distributed Resource Scheduler, and we've got VMs moving. As those VMs move, to be able to understand which applications are impacted and being able to tie that through the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, we need to track that. And we need to track that pretty aggressively and consistently and continuously so we understand the relationships and can visualize that physical and virtual environment across the compute, network, and storage. And that's visualize. Analyze. Analyze is about the ability to put together availability, performance, and configuration. Why configuration? Rick mentioned this a moment ago when we talked about storage, but 80% of the time when something goes wrong in the environment, it's the result of an intended or unintended change. So we need to track configuration, any deviation from the gold standard, and fold that into the model so we understand, is there an impact, which applications may be impacted, and what is the root cause? So understand the relationships and the dependencies across that compute, network, and storage environment and bring all those pieces together. The reason performance is critical in there, of course, is a very smart person told me when I entered this industry that things will tend to degrade before they fail. So if we can track any kind of performance degradation, we can understand that, get at the issue before the business is impacted. So that's analyze. And then optimize from an operations point of view is understanding the utilization of the environment, being able to provide some excellent reports, trending information, and know when we're going to exceed a level of utilization that's unacceptable. We've exceeded a threshold. So being able to track that and leverage that for planning is pretty crucial. We just talked about server virtualization. I'm interested in how people are progressing with software-defined networking. And is anybody moving forward with a Brocade or a Cisco, Juniper recently acquired Contrail, a VMware solution. VMware, our good sister company, acquired a company called Nicira, but most of the major players are all moving forward with software-defined networking, or think of it as virtualized networking. So I'm very interested in the results here. So I'll give folks a minute to provide their feedback on software-defined networking.
Yeah, Tom, this is a good one because a lot of times the hype doesn't match the actual deployment that are out there. But in the case of software-defined networking, it's something that the benefits are so compelling that customers have to at least evaluate and look at it for portions of their environment. Now, maybe it doesn't make sense for all of their infrastructure, but a lot of times, I think as you pointed out, they'll start in test and dev and use SDN for test and dev just because of the fact that the benefits are just so hard to ignore. But they may wait a little while until the technology matures to be able to move it into their core data center infrastructure.
Indeed, and as we think about the software-defined data center or the software-defined IT environment, it started out with virtualization of servers. We've got storage virtualization and some interesting things happening here. Network virtualization or software-defined networking, all crucial, as you say, and all needing to be managed in a different way. We're going to get into more of that conversation in a moment here, but the foundational management piece to be able to look at the physical and virtual together is pretty crucial. I think we've chatted enough here. We can probably move to next and see the results here.
So yeah, if you're looking now, 60% in the evaluation phase, 40% plan to implement in the next 12 months. So again, not inconsistent with what at least I've heard talking to customers and seen in the industry so far. So this is one where perhaps the actual deployment and implementation is catching up with the hype in front of software-defined networking.
Indeed, and every single one of the major players out there that we mentioned a moment ago are all moving quickly. If you go to their web pages, software-defined networking is right on the front and center. So thank you for the response there. Very interesting information. I'm going to talk about, when we talk about the operations team, I want to talk about visualize, analyze, and optimize. In the visualize area, it is about providing compelling dashboards that are flexible by role, so they can be configured depending upon the responsibility of the individuals. They're also flexible if there are service providers out there to be able to leverage these as a way to present information to customers on services that have been provided, oftentimes for money, being able to provide a nice dashboard and nice reports. So that visualize is very crucial. The other thing I might mention is that the visualization or this unified presentation layer at EMC, we use this for the operations view. We also provide the same view and the same technology for the storage team. I mentioned the linkage between the storage resource management solution as well as the service assurance solution, leveraging the same views. But visualize is very crucial in being able to present it in a variety of ways, both in dashboards and reports. The other thing regarding visualize is being able to look at from the virtual machine through the infrastructure, compute, network, and storage, and understand those relationships. And this includes things like virtual switches. So virtual switches are very complex devices that have connections happening within that need to be understood and those relationships understood. So virtual NICs, for example, and being able to see all of those. That's when I talk about the new paradigm or the new management challenges, those are the critical things that management solutions need to be able to do. Track the VMs, track that movement, know where the VMs are running, which ESX servers they're running on, for example, as well as understand what's going on inside of virtual switches and tie that to the physical switches. So that end-to-end view is crucial for operations teams to understand what's happening, understand impact, and have the information they need to take action. Again, I'm going to talk about analyze, and there's a couple of things I want to talk about regarding analyze. The first is getting to the root cause of an issue and understanding the impact. Historically, that's tended. We know that mean time to recover or mean time to repair an issue is based on mean time to identify and mean time to fix. And we know that most of the time is taken on mean time to identify. There's a war room that's set up, a number of folks get on the call. They're all trying to use their own tool, their own view of what's happening, and try to resolve the problem. And that takes, the analysts will tell us, about 80% of the time. So the first objective of a good management solution today is quickly reduce the mean time to identify. Have a tool, in this case an EMC solution, service assurance solution, that understands the relationships and the dependencies so that those many, many, many alerts that come over the transom can be dramatically reduced to the single root cause. So we separate out the symptoms from the root cause so the very smart people in our IT organizations can go address the problem and fix it rather than chasing symptoms. It becomes very expensive and very time-consuming to chase those symptoms. But more importantly, we want to get at it in a proactive way, understand when we're in a risk condition. That is to say, if we've got redundant environments, which most of us have out there, understand those redundancies, and if a primary or a backup goes down, even though the services are continuing to perform and we don't have any impact or we have a small degradation, being able to get and resolve that risk condition before we have a serious or any impact to the business. Then I mentioned earlier performance information. Performance information is crucial because it allows us to pick up the first rounds of degradation. We may not even exceed the threshold for performance. However, we know that we've now seen an increase in the delay in the performance metric, which allows us to take action, identify the issue, and resolve it. And at the same time, understand the impact. Knowing where the applications are running, whether the application is performing, and where those VMs are running is crucial to understanding when we do have an issue in the infrastructure, where the impact is. The other part of Analyze I mentioned a moment ago is configuration management. Configuration management, being able to look at the deviation from the gold standard. Not only do we need to be able to look at the deviation from the gold standard for purposes of compliance. So many of us in the IT organization, many of the folks on the phone get asked now to provide reports demonstrating compliance with external standards, PCI, for example, or our own internal standards. This happens with the EMC IT, for example, so they leverage these same tools to be able to demonstrate compliance. But even more importantly, being able to take that information, and each time we have any kind of a deviation from the gold standard, being able to fold that into the model. So if there is an issue and we see some performance impact on an application, we can look and see there was a change in the environment. Something changed. We no longer have the gold standard configuration. That may be the root cause of the issue and be able to isolate it to that change. I said earlier, 80% of the time when there is a problem, it's usually the result of an intended or unintended change. Being able to understand that in relation to service assurance and meeting the service level agreement is pretty crucial. And then the final thing here regarding Analyze is being able to take action or remediate depending on the problem. We have folks like CompuCom who used our network configuration management tool, for example, to do updates. And instead of taking weeks to do updates across their very large network environment, they can do it all in 30 minutes. That's an example of leveraging that remediation capability. That remediation capability, of course, can be used if there is an issue and being able to go back to a previous rev or the gold standard. So configuration management, a crucial piece that goes along with the performance and availability management. And we'll talk about Optimize. Rick, a moment ago, talked about Optimize in the storage environment. And, of course, this is crucial. We've got a number of storage arrays. We're trying to provide the best performance for the application, but at the same time optimize the utilization of the resources. We talk about the same thing here, getting service level agreements, key performance indicators, key quality indicators, chargeback and showback, a number of different reports and information, both in dashboards as well as presented in reports, that help to optimize the utilization of the resources, make sure that the applications are delivering the performance as expected, but at the same time know when we need to add additional resources to a particular application, or whether we can back off and scale back the resources because we're meeting the performance requirements. You can go ahead and move forward here. So the suite environment, as Rick showed a moment ago with the Storage Resource Management Suite, we have the Service Assurance Suite. Now, what's comprised in the Service Assurance Suite? Not a surprise, we put together availability, performance, and configuration to provide end-to-end management across the physical and virtual environment, compute, network, and storage. That's where customers are trying to get to in the operations team, and being able to plan, obtain the scorecards, do SLA management. Again, if you're a service provider, leverage this information and these reports and these dashboards with customers. In understanding what's happening in the environment, to understand the impact, be able to do impact analysis, and get to the root cause of any issue before the business is impacted, understand those risk conditions. So the Service Assurance Suite is the way we've put it together within EMC, and it has a very tight linkage to the two areas that Rick talked about a moment ago, in particular the storage resource management area. And so Verizon, a great customer using the capabilities that we're talking about here regarding service assurance. Verizon, I'm sure most folks know, a very large service provider, delivering services to customers in 150 different countries around the world. And Verizon was challenged at getting to the root cause of issues. As you can imagine, Verizon has hundreds of thousands of alerts per month that needed to be addressed, and way too many of those were symptoms, and they were looking for a way to quickly get to the root cause of issues as opposed to having the team chase symptoms. In their view, every time they opened a trouble ticket, it cost them $100, which may not seem much, but when you're opening many trouble tickets that are associated with symptoms, it adds up dramatically. At the same time, they're trying to meet SLA commitments and commitments to the business, and meet the service levels that they've talked about. So they're managing more than 1,000 networks, scaling to a very large environment, covering a range of technologies, and the results were quite impressive. They're now 99.7% of alarms can be identified in real time. They can get to the root cause and put the smart people on the problems. They're consistently meeting their SLAs, and they have some very strict and aggressive requirements around SLAs, and their efficiency improved dramatically, 2 times improvement in the efficiency, so some great results for Verizon. Just one other quick story, Rick, if you'll move forward to Microsoft. Microsoft, another very good customer of the Service Assurance Suite. We talked an awful lot about VMware and the virtualized environment that VMware provides. We also work with a number of other virtualization technologies. In this case, Microsoft, a nice integration of the Service Assurance Suite with SCOM, if you're familiar with the System Center from Microsoft. This is the Microsoft IT team. And again, they're managing a very large environment with over 850,000 network ports and 100,000 servers, just a large environment. And they're getting some great results. They're maximizing their user experience, and they have some stringent requirements on the performance they need to provide to their internal and external customers, making better informed planning decisions. This is regarding understanding the utilization levels, getting those reports and trending information to make good, smart decisions, and then substantial alarm reduction. We've touched on that a few times, but if we can eliminate all of those symptoms from hitting the operations team screens and just put aside as symptoms and presenting the root cause, we can have much greater efficiency. So they've been able to do that.
Sorry, Tom. These are great examples because what it shows is that a company as large as Verizon, and if you imagine the scale and the amount of processes that they have to implement in terms of that, a lot of people look at this and say, well, I'm not a Microsoft or I'm not a Verizon, but you want the levels of efficiency that these companies have deployed in order to deploy your software-defined data center, right? So it does, even though these are very large companies, a lot of the models I think that are put in place by these companies really point to some of the requirements around infrastructure management in these virtual data centers.
Very well said. The solutions scale from small and medium to large, but you're right. It does scale to very large and provide some great results. So I think we're ready to do a summary here, Rick.
I think we are. As a matter of fact, I know we've got some questions that had come into the queue as well. So I also want to make sure that we do have time as we approach the top of the hour to be able to address some of the questions. But just a quick summary here, really the ability to be able to provide that visualization across the entire environment, applications, backup, storage, and your networks. Analyze those, and then optimize your data center resources. These are really some of the key driving factors behind a lot of what we've talked about today. I do, again, want to make sure we address some of the questions that did come up within the Q&A. So, Jesse, you want to go ahead and just look through the Q&A and perhaps pick a couple that we can use?
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah, sure. Rick and Tom, thank you both for your presentations. Definitely shed a lot of light. I think our audience is engaged. The first question here for Tom, we do have time for a couple questions. Tom, how quickly can the EMC solution be implemented, and what is the time to value?
Oh, great question. So time to value is a question that comes up often. Pleased to say that the solution is quite automated. When we implement any one of the solutions we're talking about, whether it's service assurance or storage resource management or the backup and recovery especially is very automated. It goes in, it discovers the environment, it understands what's happening, and provides value very quickly. So we're talking about days and weeks rather than months or 6 months or longer. So time to value is quite quick with the solutions we just talked about.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Rick, here's a question I think you might want to address. I have a large backup environment with Avamar, Data Domain, Semantic Net Backup. Does Data Protection Advisor provide a single view across these multiple systems?
Yeah, so again, another good question, and again, really an environment that's perfect for Data Protection Advisor or DPA. What it does is actually goes in and it discovers all the elements within these heterogeneous environments. So it'll go off and discover all your Symantec and your Data Domain and your Avamar backup infrastructures and bring it now into one view. Because what happens is that customers, in order to manage that today, is I may need 2 or 3 management consoles to manage the software from the different vendors, and if I'm trying to consolidate this under a cloud environment, that becomes very difficult to manage these heterogeneous environments. So, we understand that people don't necessarily want to rip and replace investments they've made, so that's one of the reasons we really focus Data Protection Advisor as a heterogeneous solution for backup management and data protection management out across those diverse environments. So that's a great environment that would be very beneficial for data protection as they look at trying to broaden their backup reach.
Mm-hmm. Rick, one other question here. One of our attendees wrote, I have heard that EMC is introducing new automation technology for the SDDC. Would you care to share your plans?
Rick, somebody's got some inside information.
Yeah. So, so all I can say at this point is that, yes, there is actually some very exciting technology that is being announced around EMC World, which is coming up in May. And it's focused specifically around the software-defined data center, or SDDC, as it was asked within the question itself. All I can encourage you to do is to follow EMC.com or follow us on Twitter. You're going to start to see a lot more information essentially come out around some of the things we're doing within software-defined storage, specifically around EMC World. So all I can say say is stay tuned. We will be more than happy to share information as it becomes available, but it's something, needless to say, that we're very excited about, and I'm glad to see there's some excitement in the audience as well.
Yeah, better yet, come to EMC World, right?
That's right, exactly.
Beginning of May. May 6th starts the 6th of May.
Yep, so a good reason to come to Las Vegas.
Got to come to Vegas, right?
Great. Well, I think we've reached the end of our time today. Just want to mention a recording of today's webinar will be available shortly, and all attendees will receive a link via email. Any questions we weren't able to address on today's call will be followed up by email as well. On behalf of Pipeline Magazine, I'd like to thank Rick and Tom from EMC for sharing their valuable insight into the brave new world of SDDC and SDN, and I'd like to thank all the attendees for their time and participation in today's KnowledgeCast webinar. And this is Jesse Kreiderman, Senior Editor for Pipeline Magazine. I want to wish everybody a great day.